Sometime in the early 1980s, there was a David Bowie number, China Girl, which had racist connotations. This was roughly also the time when China was making its transition from Mao to Deng and from socialism with Chinese characteristics to what they call capitalism with Chinese characteristics. 4 decades later, the world has reconfigured with China as the second pole after the United States. Given its inspiring achievements, no one would have thought of inflicting that pejorative number in the present context on the Chinese. Until COVID, that is. On Wednesday, British Parliament had a bipartisan panel recommend sanctions against China for its human rights violations in Xinjiang and Tibet. The members of the panel were part of Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, an international cross-party group of legislators working to reform the approach of democratic countries to China that shaped up in the backdrop of the global spread of COVID, that has already called for sanctions and reset of their respective governments' engagements with the Chinese. Same day, during the general debate at the United Nations, Germany spoke on behalf of 39 nations, appraising China's conduct in Xinjiang and Hong Kong, asking it to respect human rights and calling for political asylum to Uyghur refugees persecuted by China. On October 6, the United States-based Pew Research Center released a study from mostly Western nations with negative perception of China hitting highest level in over a decade, including doubts about Xi Jinping's integrity. Last month, China was in a public spat with tiny Eastern European nation Czech Republic over the visit of its Senate President Miloš Vystrčil with a delegation to Taiwan. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was quoted as saying that the Chinese will make the Czech leader pay a heavy price. Apart from an official démarche to the Chinese ambassador in Prague, the Czech Foreign Minister Tomáš Petříček chided Yi for his intemperate language on Twitter. A month before, in August, on his first foreign trip after Wuhan-borne coronavirus struck the world, Yi's first port of call on a whirlwind Europe trip started with a glitch. Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte slipped out of Rome for a break and chose to speak to Yi on phone instead. Statement released by his office mentioned Hong Kong ahead of China-EU relations as one of the issues discussed. Belt and Road Initiative was completely missing from the readout. Significant because Italy had become the first country to join the Xi Jinping-inspired massive infrastructure project, in good measure contributing to the region of Lombardy becoming world's first corona hotspot outside of China with dire consequences. One would think such widespread reprimands would chasten the Chinese leadership and make them respond with some humility and accommodation. What we see instead is a brinkmanship not seen in the world of diplomacy since the time of John Foster Dulles. Faced with increasing world pressure in March, Li Jianzhao, spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing, had this in-your-face answer, and I quote, "If someone claims that China's exports are toxic, then stop wearing China-made masks and protective gowns, or using China-exported ventilators. This way, you will stay clear from the virus. Political virus is more terrible than COVID-19, unquote. As Australia demanded an independent probe into the origins of the virus, China slapped an 80% tariff on imports of barley from the Southern Pacific nation, using economic coercion measures in aid of diplomacy. It is significant that Australia decided to stand its ground despite China accounting for as much as 38% of all its exports, risking a major part of its economy in these difficult times. Faced with the prospect of extradition of Meng Wanzhou, daughter of Huawei founder, to the United States on technology theft charge, China has responded with arresting 2 Canadian citizens in what is being called as abduction diplomacy. According to a Canadian think tank poll in late June, a majority of respondents felt boycotting Chinese goods would send a strong message of disapproval to China. Responding to public mood, Trudeau administration dropped free trade negotiations with China in September. Australia might be American satellite and Canada part of the Five Eyes intelligence sharing Western network. But what of Russia? Ideological friend and brother? Even Putin has not been spared, with the neighbors having a tiff over transit of Chinese expats at border town of Suifenhe in April, returning from Russian towns under COVID lockdown. And in July, Russian embassy in Beijing faced flack for tweeting history of Vladivostok, the famous Far East Russian port, with official Chinese media claiming it was Chinese territory till 1860, making it a possible target of Chinese irredentism in future. Germany became the first European nation to announce an Indo-Pacific policy in clear message of disapproval of the Chinese actions with Hong Kong and Taiwan last month. And on May 10, Chinese broadcast network CGTN tweeted that the Mount Everest peak lay on the Chinese side in Tibet and not Nepal, before hastily deleting it. Few days later, reports emerged of China having unilaterally moved border pillars at boundary of about 11 Nepal villages to expand Chinese territory, leading to protests outside its embassy in Kathmandu. In June, China staked claim over the Sakateng Wildlife Sanctuary in Trashigang district of eastern Bhutan at the United Nations Global Environment Facility Council and opposed funding to the project. For perspective, the sanctuary is located at a lower latitude than India's Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh to the east. If this still sounds decent, what of tiny Tahiti in South Pacific? In 2018, the Chinese embassy rented a private residence for locating its consular premises. On expiry of the lease agreement, the owner wanted it vacated. China flatly refused, offering to buy out the property instead. Apparently, the Chinese had built some tech surveillance infrastructure and radar facilities on the property and did not wish to relocate, despite an offer of an alternative site by the Tahitian government. Now, who bullies a poor private citizen of a small island nation? We have not even mentioned the belligerence that nations in Southeast Asia have come to live with when it comes to China. The tiff with Japan on the Senkaku Island, to the drying up of the Mekong countries, from sinking a Vietnamese frigate to bullying Indonesia and Philippines in the South China Seas, all have been reported in depth over the last few months. Deng Xiaoping's famous paraphrasing of a Chinese proverb, "Hide your strength, bide your time," was aimed at buying peace in an increasingly unipolar world with America as the global hegemon. The idea was to grow without getting into confrontations that could prove expensive, both in the neighborhood and afar. This was 1990. Under Xi Jinping thought, China seems to have outgrown Deng's dictum, with the Middle Kingdom's wolf warrior diplomats breaking every rule in the book of international relations worth breaking, as we have seen. The term wolf warrior diplomacy comes from the 2015 Chinese action flick Wolf Warrior and its 2017 sequel. The protagonist, Leng Feng, is a well-meaning special forces outlaw who gets punished for indiscipline before release and resurrection as a special mission commando. Guess what was the punishment for Feng? Solitary confinement.